we've had relatively reliable birth control since 1960. Okay, that's not very long. And we underestimate the unbelievable technological triumph of birth control. It's the hydrogen bomb. It's the transistor. Like, it's a major league
All right, let's pause there for a minute.
transformation in human.
He says this is like as major an intervention in human history as the atom bomb or the transistor. What is he saying? I think he's acknowledging, and hats off to him because few people these days are acknowledging this. Contraception was a radical, and what does radical mean? To the root, game changer in the relationships of men and women. Do you want to know why we don't even know today what a man and a woman is? What men and women are? Why do we not know this today? What is the fundamental purpose, just on the natural level, of the sexual difference? You know, if an alien from a sexless planet landed on planet Earth and was caught off guard at the fact that we have two different expressions of the same humanity, male and female, what would he conclude? Why are we different? This alien from the sexless galaxy would recognize that all of the functioning of the human organism is complete except one function of the human organism, right? I am complete in all my functions as a man except in one. My respiratory system works all by itself. My circulatory system works all by itself. My digestive system works all by itself. But I have this system called the reproductive system that does not work on its own. And a woman's circulatory system, respiratory system, digestive system, etc., they work all on their own. She has one system that doesn't work on its own, the reproductive system. And in order for her reproductive system to function and my reproductive system to function, we have to function together. This is what the alien from the sexless galaxy realizes when he descends on planet Earth, where things are sexed, where things are gendered, right? If you've watched my other videos before, you've heard me probably say this. The root word in gender is gen, right? We see the same root in words like generous, generate, progeny, genealogy, genetics, genitals. What does it mean? It means to produce or give birth to, right? Before the modern world started deconstructing the word gender, everybody on planet Earth understood that gender meant the manner in which you generate new life, right? The male gender generates the next generation with his genitals through sperm. The female gender generates the next generation through her genitals with ova, right? This is the purpose of the gender distinction. Why are we blind to this today? Because we're seeing gender through condom-colored glasses. And the goal of modern contraception, he's referring to the pill when he says, only since 1960, really, have we had reliable contraception. Through this lens, the meaning of gender gets erased because contraception is a direct frontal attack on the very meaning of gender as the manner in which your genitals generate new life. So what happens when you erase fertility from the sexual equation? Jordan Peterson's going to keep pressing into this. Let's go back to the video.
Women are now free from involuntary reproduction. That's never been the case in the entire history of the planet. Okay, we don't know...
Wait, sorry to interrupt again so quickly, but I need to comment on this. The idea that with contraception, women are finally free from involuntary reproduction. I think the very way of phrasing his point, and maybe if I sat down at a table with him and we talked about it, he would agree with me. But I think the very way he's phrasing the point already presupposes a kind of contraceptive mentality towards sex. It's contraception itself that makes women say strange things like, I got pregnant by accident. Well, were you having sex? Yeah, but the condom broke, or I forgot to take my pill, right? The freedom is not the ability to render our sexual act sterile. Freedom comes prior to that when we understand that sex and babies go together. You are free not to have sex. If you don't want to have a baby, the logical thing is don't do that which brings babies into the world. I remember years ago I was watching Garrison Keillor, or listening to Garrison Keillor on the radio, and he summed up Catholic teaching on contraception very well when he said, if you don't want to go to Minneapolis, what are you doing on the train? Right? So here, I think Jordan, in saying women are finally free from involuntary reproduction, well, it's not involuntary if you know that sex leads to babies, right? If you engage freely in the act that brings babies into the world, you shouldn't be surprised if it leads to a baby, right? The freedom is whether or not we choose to engage in sex. If we choose to engage in sex, we should accept the consequences. Contraception is kind of like bulimia, right? We want to eat the food. The bulimic wants to eat the food, but then gags to vomit up so there's no result from the food. Well, a much more healthy approach to eating would be, if you don't want to gain the weight or have the impact of what food is meant to do, well, don't eat the food, right? It's like Jordan Peterson is saying here, analogous with food. We finally, because we found some way of eating without some technology, I can take this pill and eat whatever I want without consequences. Finally, we're free to eat without involuntary gaining of weight. Well, if you don't want to gain the weight, don't eat the food. That's my point. And I think maybe Jordan would agree with me if we pressed into it, but let's go back to the video.
Women are now free from involuntary reproduction. That's never been the case in the entire history of the planet. Okay, we don't know exactly what to do about that. Okay, so the first idea in the 60s was, hell, let's party. And you could see why. It's like what the rules for not engaging in promiscuous sexual intercourse seemed to have vanished. So we had a couple of decades of experimentation. It's like, well, how'd that go?
All right, I want to pause there for a minute.
Little hard on the fence.
I think he's making a very compelling point here, that as soon as you remove fertility from the sexual equation, there are no more rules. Well, what does that tell us? Fertility itself is the built-in bodily compass that orients sexual activity towards marriage and the family, right? The basic principle that wise men and women have understood throughout all of human history, and certainly not just Catholics and not just Christians, is this: marriage, sex, and babies go together, and in that order, right? If you retain fertility as the sexually orienting compass, we will understand intuitively sex leads to babies. Who should be having sex? Only those people who have committed to the responsible raising and education of the babies that might come into existence through their sexual acts. And what has that commitment been called throughout all of human history? Marriage, right? So remove fertility, and it's only going to take a little bit of time before sex and marriage gets ruptured from each other, right? We no longer think of sexual activity as a marital reality. We think of it as a kind of recreation or contact sport, or we evaluate our sexual choices not based on who could be a good mother or father to my children, but who's hot and who can give me more exciting, pleasurable sex, right? See, that's what happens when you remove fertility from the equation. The guiding principle is no longer marriage and family. The guiding principle is pleasure, and you get evaluated based on whether or not you bring other people pleasure. That's a utilitarian evaluation of sex, and we end up using one another rather than loving one another. Okay, back to Jordan Peterson.
A couple of decades of experimentation. It's like, well, how'd that go? Little hard on the family, I would say.
That's an understatement.
That's not so good for kids. AIDS, that wasn't a plus. Could have killed us all. And it mutated, particularly to take advantage of promiscuous sex, because viruses are very tricky things. So it turns out that sex is a little bit more complicated than we thought. Well, it actually turns out that it's a lot more complicated than we think. Okay, and now it's 50, 60 years later, and we're trying to sort this out. It's like, well, when is it okay to have sex? Exactly. And when is it not okay to have sex? And what does it mean that it's okay? And what does consent mean? And the answer to that is, well, we never used to have to think these things through, because the rule was don't have sex until you get married. That was the rule. Now that isn't the rule. Okay, so what's the rule?
All right, I want to pause
well,
there.
We're not having a conversation about that.
The rule was don't have sex until you get married. Why was that, quote, the rule? Because fertility was part of the equation, and as I said a few moments ago, it oriented sex naturally towards marriage and the family. As Jordan Peterson pointed out here, what's the impact of contraception been on the family? And he was like, not so good. On children, not so good. Thank you, Jordan Peterson, for at least acknowledging the role contraception has played in the breakdown of the family. Have we not wondered, if we haven't, we should, what is it that in the past few decades has led to such the demise in such a dramatic fashion of marriage and family life? It seems like somehow in the middle of the 20th century, some bomb went off at the very foundations of marriage and the family. And I want to suggest, and Jordan Peterson is hinting at this, that bomb, he even called it, he compared it to something as significant as the atomic bomb. That bomb was contraception. What you may not know about the history of the question here is that up until 1930, every Christian denomination across the board recognized the immorality of contraception, right? 1,930 years of uninterrupted Christian teaching on the matter. Yes, all the reformers, Luther, Calvin, and beyond condemned contraception in no uncertain terms. And I want to hold out to you. Either all of those Christian leaders and thinkers for 1,930 years were wrong, or we, for the last 90 plus years, have been wrong. And I would suggest if you judge the tree by its fruit, you cannot not conclude that for the last 90 years, we've been wrong. It was predicted in 1930, not just by Catholics, certainly not just by Christians, but by wise men and women around the world who understood the power of fertility to orient, or when you remove it, disorient our sexual choices. It was understood that if contraception becomes the order of the day, we will see an increase in adultery, we'll see an increase in premarital sex, we'll see an increase in out-of-wedlock births, we'll see an increase in abortions, we'll see an increase in divorce, we'll see an increase in sexually transmitted diseases, we'll see an increase in homosexual activity to the point that it becomes normalized, and eventually we will see the evaporation of the very meaning of the gender distinction. Along with this, it was predicted that because of the breakdown of the family, we will see an increase in fatherless children, which would lead to an increase in crime, drugs, poverty. Just go down the list of what a culture of fatherless children amounts to, and it's the world we live in today. What was the connection with contraception? Now, of course, things are much more complex than what I'm about to outline, but I'll show you the guiding thread here, and once you see the inner logic, you can't deny it, right? People throughout human history have been tempted to commit adultery, nothing new. But what throughout human history has been the main deterrent from committing adultery? The fear of an unwanted pregnancy. Take that deterrent away with contraception, and what's going to happen to rates of adultery? They will go up. What's one of the main causes of divorce? Adultery. Apply the same logic to premarital sex. There's nothing new under the sun. There's always been a temptation to it, but we've never seen premarital sex like we see it today, in the numbers we see it today, and that's because we haven't had contraception like we see it today. Insert contraception into the equation, rates of premarital sex are going to go up because there's no deterrent any longer, the child. And premarital sex is also a predictor of later marital struggle. Why? Because you're already demonstrating you don't understand the marital connection with sex. Not that it's inevitable, but it is a predictor because we've already ruptured in our minds sex from marriage because we've ruptured sex from babies, right? So it gets much worse than that. With huge increases in adultery and huge increases in premarital sex, we all know there's no 100% effective method of contraception. What's going to happen in a culture where there are huge increases in adultery, huge increases in premarital sex, and these men and women have already determined by the choice of using contraception that they do not want this act to result in a child. What's going to happen when contraception fails and women get pregnant and didn't want to be? The demand for the legalization of abortion is inevitable. So many people think the way you solve the abortion problem is by getting more contraception out there. Take a deeper look, my brothers and sisters. That is like throwing gasoline on a fire to try to put it out. In the end, there is one reason we have abortion, because men and women are having sex who are not open to the beautiful fruit of that act. Nation after nation that has embraced contraception, abortion has not decreased, it has spiked and been legalized. This is the world we live in right now. The way the culture views sex through condom-colored glasses inevitably means that you are going to be treated as dispensable, replaceable, and repeatable. Toasters are dispensable. You use it, it breaks, you throw it away. Toasters are replaceable. It breaks, you throw it away, you replace it with another one. Toasters are repeatable. There are 1 million of the very same model of toaster at the Amazon warehouse. But the human person is the kind of being that is indispensable. That's why it hurts when we get thrown away. The human being is the kind of being that is irreplaceable. That's why it hurts when we get replaced with somebody else. The human being is the kind of being that is unrepeatable. That's why it hurts when people compare us to other people, because there's no other you, there's no other me. You're incomparable, you're unrepeatable. Take another look at what the Catholic Church teaches about sex. It's an invitation to embrace this truth about your greatness and your dignity. And I think people like Jordan Peterson are having the courage to re-examine these questions and take a deeper look. I think you should too.